Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she rushed between tables at the Golden Swan restaurant. Her feet hurt badly after working for 12 hours straight. The fancy restaurant in downtown Manhattan was always busy, but tonight felt different. The manager, Mr. Peterson, had been running around like a crazy person all day. "Sarah, table 7 needs more water," called Maria, another waitress who looked just as tired as Sarah felt. Sarah grabbed the water pitcher and walked quickly to table 7. Her black uniform was wrinkled and her hair was coming loose from its ponytail. She had been working double shifts for 3 months now, trying to save money for her college classes. Every dollar mattered when you were studying music at night, school. The Golden Swan was not like other restaurants. Rich people came here to eat expensive food and make business deals. The walls were covered with gold decorations and the tables had white cloth that cost more than Sarah made in a day. A beautiful black piano sat in the corner, but nobody ever played it. Sarah looked at it every day when she cleaned that section of the restaurant. "Sarah, we need you to work extra hard tonight," Mr. Peterson said, appearing beside her like he always did when she least expected it. "We have a very important guest coming, Marcus Thornfield." Sarah had heard that name before. Marcus Thornfield was one of the richest men in the city. He owned technology companies and had more money than most people could dream of. She wondered why he would come to their restaurant when he could probably buy the whole building. "Who is he exactly?" Sarah asked while filling water glasses. "He creates computer programs and sells them for millions of dollars," Mr. Peterson explained. "He is very particular about everything, the food, the service, even the temperature of the room. If he likes this place, he might bring more rich friends here." Sarah nodded but did not really care. Rich people were just customers to her. They left good tips sometimes, but they also complained about everything. She just wanted to finish her shift and go home to study for her music theory exam. At exactly 7 o'clock, Marcus Thornfield walked through the front door. Sarah was carrying a tray of soup to another table when she saw him. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35 years old. He wore an expensive black suit and had dark hair that looked perfectly styled. 3 other men in similar suits followed behind him. Mr. Peterson rushed over to greet them like they were royalty. Sarah watched from across the room as he led them to the best table in the restaurant. It was right next to the piano, with a perfect view of the city lights through the big windows. "Sarah, you will be serving Mr. Thornfield's table tonight," Mr. Peterson whispered to her as she passed by. "Be very careful. Do not make any mistakes." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had never served such important customers before. What if she spilled something on his expensive suit? What if she said the wrong thing? Her hands started to shake a little as she walked toward their table. "Good evening, gentlemen," Sarah said in her most polite voice. "My name is Sarah, and I will be taking care of you tonight." Marcus Thornfield looked up at her with sharp green eyes. He studied her face for a moment, like he was trying to figure something out. The other men barely noticed her and continued talking about stocks and business deals. "We will have the chef's special menu," Marcus said without looking at the menu, "and bring us your best wine." Sarah wrote everything down carefully. As she turned to leave, she heard Marcus ask, "Does anyone ever play that piano?" "No, sir," Sarah replied, stopping to answer his question. "It is just for decoration." "What a waste," Marcus said, still looking at the beautiful instrument. "A piano should be played, not ignored." Sarah felt something strange when he said that. She agreed with him completely, but she could not say so. She was just a waitress and he was a billionaire. She hurried away to give the kitchen their order. For the next hour, Sarah brought them food and drinks. The men talked loudly about buying companies and making deals worth millions of dollars. They acted like the money was just numbers on paper, not something real that could change people's lives. Sarah thought about her own life as she worked. She had grown up in a small apartment with her mother and 2 younger brothers. Money was always tight. When she was little, her grandmother had an old piano that Sarah loved to play. She spent hours learning songs and making up her own music. Her grandmother always said Sarah had a gift. "Your fingers know exactly where to go," she would say. "Music lives in your heart." But when Sarah's grandmother died, they had to sell the piano to pay for the funeral. Sarah's dreams of becoming a professional musician seemed impossible after that. Her family needed her to work and help pay the bills. College was expensive, and music school was even more expensive. Now Sarah was 23 years old, and still trying to keep her musical dreams alive. She took classes at night after working all day. Her teachers said she had natural talent, but talent was not enough. She needed time to practice and money for better training. As Sarah cleared empty plates from Marcus's table, she overheard him talking to his business partners. "I am looking for something different," Marcus was saying. "Something real and authentic. Everything in business is fake now. People pretend to care about things they do not really care about." "What do you mean?" one of the other men asked. "Art, music, creativity, these things used to matter. Now everything is about making money as fast as possible," Marcus replied. Sarah found herself listening more carefully as she wiped down a nearby table. She had never heard a rich person talk about art and music like it was important. "You are too serious, Marcus," another man laughed. "Money is what makes the world work. Nobody cares about piano music anymore. Maybe that is the problem," Marcus said quietly. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. She wanted to tell him that some people still cared about music. She wanted to tell him about the songs that lived in her mind, the melodies she hummed while washing dishes, the dreams she carried despite everything. But she was just a waitress, and he was Marcus Thornfield. She finished cleaning and walked back to the kitchen, not knowing that this conversation would change her life forever. The night was about to become very different from any other night she had ever worked. Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard Mr. Peterson calling her name. His voice sounded strange, like he was nervous about something. She dried her hands quickly and walked back into the dining room. Marcus Thornfield was standing next to the piano now, running his fingers along the smooth black surface. The other businessmen were still sitting at the table drinking wine and looking bored. Mr. Peterson stood nearby, wringing his hands like he always did when he was worried. "Sarah, Mr. Thornfield has a special request," Mr. Peterson said. His face was red and sweaty. "He would like to know if anyone on our staff can play piano." Sarah felt her heart jump into her throat. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with those sharp green eyes. How could he know about her musical background? She had never mentioned it to anyone at work. I do not understand," Sarah said carefully. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening. "I was told by your manager that you study music. Is that true?" Sarah shot a look at Mr. Peterson, who looked down at his shoes. He must have told Marcus about her night school classes when she was in the kitchen. Sarah felt trapped, like a mouse in a corner with a cat watching. "Yes, I take some music classes," Sarah admitted, "but I am not a professional pianist." "Wonderful," Marcus said, clapping his hands together once. "I would like you to play something for us." The words hit Sarah like cold water. She shook her head immediately. "Oh no, sir, I cannot do that. I am working. I am just a waitress here." "Not tonight," Marcus said. His voice was friendly but firm. "Tonight I would like you to be a pianist." Sarah looked around the restaurant. Other customers were starting to notice the conversation. Some of them were looking over with curious expressions. The other waitresses were watching from behind the counter, probably glad they were not in her position. "Sir, I really cannot," Sarah said, her voice getting smaller. "I have not performed in front of people for years. I would make mistakes." Marcus walked closer to her. He was tall, probably 6 feet, and Sarah had to look up to meet his eyes. "How long has it been since you played for an audience?" "Since high school," Sarah answered honestly. "That was 5 years ago." "Then you are overdue," Marcus said with another smile. Mr. Peterson stepped forward, looking like he might faint. "Mr. Thornfield, perhaps we could call a professional pianist to come here instead." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I want her to play." He pointed at Sarah. "There is something authentic about her, something real." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Sir, please, I'm not good enough to play for people like you. I will embarrass myself in the restaurant." "People like me?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of people do you think we are?" Sarah realized she had said something wrong. Her face turned red. I meant successful people, important people, people who are used to professional entertainment. One of the businessmen at the table laughed loudly. Marcus, leave the poor girl alone. She obviously does not want to play. But Marcus ignored him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Sarah watched as he counted out several $100 bills. More money than she made in 2 weeks of working double shifts. This is yours if you play 3 songs, Marcus said, holding out the money. Any 3 songs you want. Sarah stared at the cash. With that money, she could pay for her entire semester of music classes. She could buy the textbooks she needed. She could even take private piano lessons for a few months. But her hands were already shaking just thinking about sitting at the piano bench. What if she forgot the notes? What if her fingers would not work properly? What if everyone laughed at her? I do not think this is a good idea, Sarah said weakly. Why not? Marcus asked. Are you afraid of the piano? No, Sarah said quickly. I am afraid of failing in front of everyone. Marcus nodded like he understood. Fear of failure is something I know well. Do you know how many times I failed before I became successful? Sarah shook her head. 47 times, Marcus said. I started 47 different business projects. That completely failed. People laughed at me. They said I was wasting my time and money. He walked over to the piano and pressed one of the keys. A single clear note filled the air. But I kept trying because I believed in something. I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could create something meaningful. Sarah watched him press a few more keys, creating a simple melody. Do you believe in your music, Sarah? The question hit her hard. Did she believe in her music? She thought about all the nights she spent studying music theory, all the hours she practiced on the old keyboard in her tiny apartment. She thought about the songs she wrote in her head while serving tables, the melodies that came to her in dreams. Yes, she whispered. I do believe in it. Then play, Marcus said simply. Not for me, not for them, not for the money. Play for yourself. Sarah looked at the money in his hand again. Her practical side screamed at her to take it. Her family needed help with bills. She needed textbooks and tuition money, but her artistic side was terrified of disappointment. What if I am not good? Sarah asked. What if you are? Marcus replied. The restaurant had become quieter now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen to their conversation. Sarah realized that everyone was waiting for her decision. She thought about her grandmother, who used to say that music was not meant to be hidden away like a secret treasure. Music is meant to be shared, her grandmother always said. It is a gift. You give to the world. Sarah took a deep breath. 3 songs? 3 songs, Marcus confirmed. And you will really pay me all that money? Every dollar, Marcus promised. Sarah looked at the piano. It was beautiful, much nicer than any instrument she had ever played. The keys looked perfect, and the wood was polished until it shined like a mirror. Okay, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will try. Marcus smiled widely and handed her the money. Thank you, Sarah. I have a feeling this is going to be very interesting. Sarah took the cash with trembling hands and walked slowly toward the piano. She could feel everyone in the restaurant watching her. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might jump out of her chest. She sat down on the piano bench and lifted the lid that covered the keys. The beautiful black and white keys seemed to glow under the restaurant lights. Sarah placed her hands above them, but could not make herself press down. What had she gotten herself into? Sarah's hands hovered over the piano keys like birds afraid to land. The restaurant felt completely silent, even though she knew people were still eating and talking. Her heart was pounding so loudly. She was sure everyone could hear it. She pressed one key gently. The note was clear and beautiful, much richer than any sound she had ever heard from her cheap keyboard at home. The piano was perfectly tuned and responded to her touch like it was alive. Take your time, Marcus said from somewhere behind her. His voice was kind, but Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention on her shoulders. She decided to start with something simple, a piece called For Elise that she had learned in high school. Her fingers found the opening notes slowly, carefully. The familiar melody began to flow from the piano, but her playing sounded stiff and nervous. Sarah made it through the first section without any major mistakes, but she could tell something was wrong. The music sounded mechanical, like a robot was playing instead of a person. She was so focused on not making errors that she forgot to put any feeling into the song. From the dining room, she could hear the businessmen continuing their conversation about stock prices and company mergers. They were treating her music like background noise, something to ignore while they talked about more important things. That was nice, one of them said loudly to Marcus. Very pleasant dinner music. Sarah finished the piece and looked back at Marcus. He was listening carefully, unlike his friends, but his expression was hard to read. She could not tell if he was impressed or disappointed. "What else can you play?" Marcus asked. Sarah thought for a moment. She decided to try a piece by Chopin, something a little more challenging, but as soon as she started, her nervousness got worse. Her fingers stumbled over notes she knew perfectly well. She had to stop and start over twice. The second attempt was better, but not by much. Sarah could feel sweat forming on her forehead. The beautiful piano deserved better than this clumsy performance. She was making it sound ordinary when it should sound magical. "I am sorry," Sarah said, turning around to face Marcus. "I told you I was not good enough for this." "Do not apologize," Marcus said, walking closer to the piano. "But I think you are holding back. You are playing it safe." "I do not want to make mistakes," Sarah explained. "Mistakes are not the problem," Marcus replied. "The problem is that you are not taking any risks. Great music requires courage." Sarah did not understand what he meant. She was already taking a huge risk by playing in front of people. What more did he want from her? "Try something different," Marcus suggested. "Something that means something to you personally." Sarah thought about the songs she loved most. There was a piece by Debussy called Clair de Lune that always made her feel peaceful. She had practiced it hundreds of times in her apartment, playing it softly so she would not disturb the neighbors. She placed her hands on the keys and began the gentle flowing melody. This time she tried to forget about the audience and just focus on the music itself. The notes seemed to float through the air like moonlight on water. For a few moments, Sarah felt more relaxed. The music was working its magic, carrying her away from her nervousness. But then she heard one of the businessmen laugh at something his friend said, and her concentration broke. Her fingers hit a wrong note, then another. Sarah stopped playing and put her hands in her lap. Her face was burning with embarrassment. "I cannot do this," she said quietly. "Yes, you can," Marcus said firmly. "But you are letting other people's opinions control your performance. Music is not about what other people think, it is about what you feel." "Easy for you to say," Sarah replied, and immediately regretted her sharp tone. "I mean, you are successful. People respect you. When I play, people just see a waitress pretending to be a musician." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He walked over to his business associates and spoke to them in a low voice. Sarah could not hear what he said, but all three men suddenly became very quiet and turned their attention toward the piano. "Now," Marcus said, returning to Sarah's side, "no more distractions. Play something that matters to you." Sarah wanted to run away. She wanted to give him back his money and return to serving tables where she knew what she was doing, but something in Marcus's voice made her stay seated at the piano bench. She thought about her grandmother again. Her grandmother never worried about making mistakes when she played. She always said that music was about sharing your heart with other people, not about being perfect. Sarah decided to try a different approach. Instead of choosing a famous classical piece, she would play something simpler. A folk song her grandmother used to sing, one that Sarah had arranged for piano herself. The melody was sweet and sad, about a young woman who had to leave her home to find work in the city. As Sarah played, she thought about her own life. How she had left her small hometown to come to Manhattan. How she worked long hours at jobs she did not love, all so she could chase her dream of becoming a real musician. This time, her playing was different. The notes were not perfect, but they carried emotion. Sarah could feel the music connecting with something deep inside her chest. For the first time that evening, she was not just playing notes on a piano. She was telling a story. When she finished the song, Sarah looked back at Marcus. His expression had changed. He was no longer just politely listening. He was truly engaged with her music. "Better," Marcus said with a nod. "Much better. But I think you have more to give. That was just the surface of what you can do." Sarah felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. What did he mean by more to give? She had played with feeling. She had shared something personal. What else was he looking for? "I do not understand what you want from me," Sarah said. Marcus smiled mysteriously. "I want you to stop being afraid of your own talent. I want you to stop playing like you are apologizing for being here. You belong at that piano just as much as anyone else in the world." Sarah stared at him. No one had ever talked to her like that before. No one had ever suggested that she belonged anywhere. "Important. One more song," Marcus said. "But this time, play like you mean it. Play like your life depends on it." Sarah turned back to the piano keys. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was not just from nervousness. It was from something else. Something that felt like electricity running through her veins. She was about to discover what she was truly capable of. As Sarah sat at the piano, something strange began to happen. The familiar weight of the keys under her fingertips awakened memories she had tried to forget. It was like opening a door that had been locked for years. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting on a wooden stool next to her grandmother's old upright piano. The instrument was scratched and one of the keys stuck sometimes, but it had the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. "Music is not about the fancy instrument," her grandmother used to say. "Music comes from inside your heart. The piano just helps it come out." Sarah's fingers began to move almost by themselves, playing a simple melody her grandmother had taught her long ago. It was just a children's song about birds flying south for winter, but as Sarah played it, she could smell her grandmother's kitchen and feel the warm afternoon sunlight coming through the window. Marcus stepped closer, but Sarah barely noticed. She was lost in the memory of those precious afternoons when the world was simple and full of possibilities. Her grandmother would make tea with honey, and they would sit at the piano for hours, learning new songs and making up their own. "You have special hands, Sarah," her grandmother would say, watching Sarah's small fingers dance across the keys. "They know things your mind has not learned yet." Sarah had not understood what that meant when she was little, but now, sitting at this expensive piano in this fancy restaurant, she was beginning to remember. Her hands did know things. They remembered melodies she thought she had forgotten. They remembered the feeling of music flowing through her like water. She finished the children's song and immediately began another piece, this time something more complex. It was a Chopin waltz that had taken her months to learn when she was 15. Back then she had dreamed of playing it in a concert hall someday, wearing a beautiful dress while hundreds of people listened in silence. Those dreams seemed so foolish now, but as Sarah played the waltz, she could feel that 15-year-old girl's excitement again. The music was challenging, full of quick runs and delicate passages that required perfect timing. But her fingers remembered exactly what to do. Marcus stood perfectly still, watching her with an expression of growing amazement. He had expected her to be nervous and make mistakes, but something was happening that he had not anticipated. The waitress was disappearing and a real musician was taking her place. Sarah moved from the Chopin waltz into a piece by Bach, then into something by Mozart. Each song seemed to unlock more memories, more forgotten skills. She remembered her high school music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had pulled her aside after class one day. "Sarah, you have a gift," Mrs. Rodriguez had said. "With the right training, you could be a professional pianist. Have you thought about applying to music school?" Sarah had been so excited that day. She had rushed home to tell her family about the possibility of studying music at a real college. But when she arrived, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and looking worried. "We cannot afford college," her mother had said gently. "Maybe someday, when things get better." Sarah had put away her musical dreams that day and focused on finding work to help her family. But the music never really left her. It lived quietly in her heart, waiting for a chance to come out again. Now, as her fingers moved across the beautiful piano keys, Sarah felt like she was greeting an old friend she had not seen for years. Every note felt familiar and right. The restaurant around her seemed to fade away until there was nothing but Sarah and the music. She began to play a piece she had composed herself when she was 16. It was based on a poem about a girl who had to choose between following her dreams and taking care of her family. Sarah had never played it for anyone before, not even her grandmother. The melody was both sad and hopeful, like watching the sun set while knowing it would rise again tomorrow. As Sarah played, she thought about all the choices she had made since she was 16. She had chosen responsibility over dreams, survival over art, practical over beautiful. But sitting at this piano, Sarah realized that maybe those choices had not killed her musical dreams after all. Maybe they had just made her stronger, more aware of what music really meant. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he listened. He had heard many professional pianists perform in concert halls and opera houses around the world. But there was something different about Sarah's playing. It was not just technically skilled, although she was clearly very talented. It was honest in a way that most professional performances were not. The other people in the restaurant had stopped talking now, though they probably did not realize it. Sarah's music was filling the space around them, creating a mood that made normal conversation feel inappropriate. Sarah moved into another song, this one a jazz standard that her grandmother had loved. As she played, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice singing along. The memory was so vivid that Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she did not stop playing. "Music is the language of the soul," her grandmother used to say. "When you play from your soul, other people's souls recognize it and respond." For the first time in years, Sarah was playing from her soul. All the technical training, all the hours of practice, all the musical knowledge she had accumulated over the years was finally serving its true purpose. It was helping her express feelings that had no words. As she finished the jazz standard, Sarah realized that her nervousness had completely disappeared. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes because the music itself was guiding her fingers. She was not performing for Marcus or his business associates or even for the money he had promised her. She was playing for her grandmother, who had believed in her talent even when no one else did. She was playing for her 16-year-old self, who had put away her dreams but never forgot them. She was playing for every person who had ever had to choose between what they loved and what they needed to survive. Marcus could see the transformation happening before his eyes. The nervous waitress who had approached the piano was gone. In her place sat a true artist, someone who understood that music was not about impressing people or earning money. It was about touching the deepest parts of human experience and sharing them with others. But as Sarah prepared to play what she thought would be her final song, neither she nor Marcus could have predicted what was about to happen next. The evening was about to take a turn that would surprise everyone in the restaurant, including Sarah herself. Sarah had been playing for almost an hour now, and her hands were beginning to feel tired. But more than physical exhaustion, she was feeling something deeper and more troubling. All these beautiful memories of her grandmother and her musical past were mixing with the painful reality of her present life. As she finished another classical piece, Sarah looked around the restaurant. The wealthy customers were eating their expensive meals and talking about their successful businesses. Meanwhile, she was still wearing her waitress uniform, still the same person who would have to go back to serving tables and washing dishes when this strange evening was over. The contrast hit her like a cold wave. For a few magical moments, she had felt like a real musician again. But she was not a real musician. She was a waitress who took music classes at night, someone who played an old keyboard in a tiny apartment while her neighbors banged on them. "Walls for quiet." "Play another one," Marcus said, his voice full of excitement. "You are just getting started." But Sarah's hands were shaking now, and not from nerves. The emotional weight of reliving her musical dreams while facing her current reality was becoming too much to bear. Every song she played reminded her of everything she had given up, everything she had lost. She thought about her grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. That was the day they sold the piano to pay for the burial costs. Sarah remembered watching the men carry the old instrument out of the house, taking away the last connection to her musical childhood. "I need to go back to work," Sarah said quietly, starting to stand up from the piano bench. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Not yet. You have something special here, something I have not heard before." "You do not understand," Sarah replied, her voice getting stronger. "This is not my life. I cannot pretend to be something I am not." Marcus moved closer to the piano. "What do you mean?" Sarah gestured around the elegant restaurant. "Look at this place. Look at all these successful people. I do not belong here. I belong in the kitchen, washing dishes and serving food to people who actually matter." "You matter," Marcus said simply. Those 2 words hit Sarah harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had told her that she mattered? When was the last time anyone had seen her as more than just a waitress, more than just someone to bring food and take away dirty plates? But instead of making her feel better, Marcus's words made her feel worse. They reminded her of all the people who had believed in her talent over the years. Her grandmother, her high school music teacher, even some of her current professors at night school. They all saw potential in her that she could not afford to pursue. "You do not know anything about my life," Sarah said, and she could hear her voice starting to crack with emotion. "You do not know what it is like to have dreams that you cannot chase because you have bills to pay and family to help." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Tell me," he said. Sarah laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Tell you what? That I work 2 jobs just to afford night school? That I practice piano on a cheap keyboard that sounds like a toy compared to this instrument? That I write songs in my head while I clean tables because I cannot afford paper to write them down?" The words were pouring out of her now, all the frustration and sadness she had been carrying for years. "You want me to play like I mean it? This is what it means. It means loving something so much that it hurts every single day because you know you will never be good enough, never have enough money, never get the chance that other people take for granted." Sarah's hands were trembling as she placed them back on the piano keys. "You want another song? Fine. But do not pretend this is some beautiful story about following your dreams. Some people do not get to follow their dreams. Some people just get to remember them." She began to play again, but this time the music was different. It was angry and sad and desperate all at once. She played a song she had written during her darkest moments, when she wondered if she was fooling herself by even trying to study music. The melody was harsh and discordant in places, reflecting the conflict between hope and despair that lived in Sarah's heart. But it was also beautiful, in the way that honest pain can be beautiful when it is expressed with skill and courage. Marcus listened with growing amazement. This was not the polite, careful music Sarah had played earlier. This was raw, emotional, truth translated into sound. It was the kind of music that most professional musicians spent their entire careers trying to create, the kind that could only come from someone who had truly suffered for their art. As Sarah played, tears began to run down her cheeks. She was not crying because she was embarrassed or nervous anymore. She was crying because the music was pulling all of her hidden feelings up to the surface, forcing her to confront the grief she carried about her abandoned dreams. The other people, in the restaurant, were completely silent now, though Sarah was too lost in her own emotional storm to notice. Even the businessmen at Marcus's table had stopped their conversation to listen. Sarah's playing became more intense, more desperate. The music seemed to be asking questions that had no answers. Why do some people get everything they want while others have to give up the things they love most? Why is talent not enough? Why do dreams have to hurt so much? But as the song reached its climax, something unexpected happened. Sarah's anger and pain began to transform into something else. The music started to carry a message of resilience, of refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible. She thought about all the nights she had studied music theory after working double shifts, all the time she had practiced scales on her cheap keyboard even when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. all the songs she had written in her head, and somehow managed to remember even without being able to write them down. Maybe she was not a professional musician, but she was still a musician. Maybe she did not perform in concert halls, but music was still alive in her heart. Maybe her dreams had been delayed, but they were not dead. As the song came to an end, Sarah played the final notes with a mixture of sadness and strength. She had poured everything into this piece, every disappointment and every hope, every moment of despair and every spark of determination. When the last note faded into silence, Sarah sat at the piano bench with tears still streaming down her face. She felt empty and full at the same time, exhausted and energized, broken and somehow more whole than she had been in years. Marcus stood behind her in complete silence. He had asked her to play like her life depended on it, and she had done exactly that. Now he was about to make a request that would push her even further, into territory she had never explored before. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with respect and something that might have been awe. "I have one more request." Sarah wiped the tears from her cheeks and looked back at Marcus. She felt emotionally drained, like she had just run a marathon using her heart instead of her legs. The piano keys seemed to glow under the restaurant lights, waiting for whatever would happen next. "What is your request?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Marcus stepped closer to the piano. His usual confident business manner was gone, replaced by something gentler and more thoughtful. "I want you to play something that no one has ever heard before. Something that comes completely from inside you." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I do not have any original songs that are ready to perform." "Yes, you do," Marcus said with certainty. "You have been writing music in your head for years. You told me so yourself." Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervousness again, but this time it was different from before. This was not the fear of making mistakes or embarrassing herself. This was the fear of revealing her deepest, most personal thoughts to a room full of strangers. "Those songs are not finished," Sarah protested. "They are just pieces and fragments. I have never written them down or worked them out properly." "Music does not need to be written down to be real," Marcus replied. "Some of the most beautiful songs in the world were never written on paper. They lived in people's hearts and voices long before anyone thought to preserve them." Sarah thought about her grandmother again. Her grandmother had known hundreds of songs, but she had never read music. She learned everything by listening and feeling and remembering. "Music is alive," she used to say. "It does not need paper to exist." "I am scared," Sarah admitted quietly. "Of what?" Marcus asked. Sarah was silent for a long moment, trying to put her fear into words. "If I play something completely original, something that comes from my heart, and people do not like it, then it means they do not like who I really am." Marcus nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. That is the risk every real artist takes, but it is also the only way to create something truly meaningful. Sarah looked down at her hands, still resting on the piano keys. She thought about one song in particular, one that had been growing in her mind for months. It started with a simple melody that came to her during her lunch breaks when she would sit in the small park behind the restaurant and watch office workers hurrying past on their way to important meetings. The song was about feeling invisible in a world full of people who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. It was about carrying dreams that felt too big for your circumstances. It was about finding beauty and meaning in small moments when everything else felt overwhelming. "There is one song," Sarah said slowly. "But it is very personal. It is about my life, my struggles. People might not understand it." "The best songs are personal," Marcus replied. "That is what makes them universal. When you share your truth, other people recognize their own truth in it." Sarah took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes and let the melody that had been living in her head begin to flow through her hands. The song started quietly with a simple theme played in the upper register of the piano. It sounded like morning light filtering through curtains, gentle and hopeful but also tentative, as if it was not sure it was welcome. As Sarah continued playing, The melody began to develop and grow. She added harmony with her left hand, creating a foundation that was solid but not overwhelming. The music seemed to be telling a story about someone trying to find their place in the world. But this time, Sarah was not just playing notes. She was composing in real time, letting the song evolve naturally as it moved through her. Parts of the melody had existed in her mind for months, but other sections were being created in the moment, inspired by the emotions she was feeling right now. The middle section of the song became more complex and intense. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, weaving together melodies that represented different aspects of her life. There was a theme for her work at the restaurant, repetitive and steady but somehow dignified. There was another theme for her musical dreams, soaring and beautiful but often interrupted by the more practical melodies. As she played, Sarah began to feel something she had never experienced before. She was not just performing music or even composing it. She was having a conversation with the piano, with the room, with everyone who was listening. The music was flowing through her, but it was also flowing back to her, changed and enriched by the act of being shared. Marcus stood absolutely still, afraid that any movement might break the spell. He had attended thousands of concerts and heard some of the world's greatest musicians perform, but he had never heard anything quite like this. Sarah was not just playing music. She was creating it from nothing, pulling melodies out of the air, and shaping them with her hands and heart. The other people in the restaurant had stopped all conversation now. Even the kitchen staff had gathered in the doorway to listen. Something extraordinary was happening, and everyone could feel it even if they could not put it into words. Sarah's song continued to evolve, moving through different moods and emotions like a journey through her inner landscape. There were moments of sadness and frustration, but there were also moments of joy and hope. The music seemed to be saying that struggle and beauty could exist in the same space, that dreams could survive even when they seemed impossible. As the song moved toward its conclusion, Sarah found herself playing with a freedom she had never known before. Her technical training was still guiding her fingers, but it was serving something larger now. The music was teaching her things about herself that she had not known, revealing parts of her heart that had been hidden even from her own awareness. The final section of the song brought all the different themes together in a way that felt both surprising and inevitable. The melody that had started so quietly and uncertainly was now being played with full confidence and strength, but it had not lost its gentleness or its honesty. Sarah played the last few measures with her eyes still closed, letting the music speak its final words. When the last note faded into silence, she sat motionless at the piano bench. Still lost in the world the song had created, she had done it. She had played something completely original, completely honest, completely hers. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had truly shared who she was with other people through her music. The silence that followed was different from any silence Sarah had ever experienced. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something sacred, something that demanded respect and reverence. Sarah finally opened her eyes and looked around the restaurant. What she saw there would change everything. When Sarah opened her eyes and looked around the Golden Swan restaurant, she saw something that took her breath away. Every single person in the room was staring at her with expressions she had never seen before on the faces of customers. Tino, wealthy businessman at table 3 who usually never looked up from his phone, was sitting perfectly still with tears in his eyes. The elderly woman who came in every week and complained about everything had her hand over her heart and was staring at Sarah like she was seeing a miracle. Even the kitchen staff had come out from behind their counters. Maria, the other waitress, who was always too busy to chat, was standing in the doorway with her mouth open. The head chef, a serious man who rarely smiled, was nodding slowly like he had just understood something important about life. But what shocked Sarah most was the complete and total silence. In all her years working at the Golden Swan, she had never heard the restaurant this quiet. Usually there was always the sound of conversation, the clinking of silverware on plates, the soft background noise of a busy dining room. Now there was nothing, just pure reverent silence. Marcus was standing closest to the piano, and Sarah could see that his face had changed completely. The confident, demanding businessman who had challenged her to play was gone. In his place was someone who looked humbled, almost amazed by what he had just witnessed. "My God," Marcus whispered, so quietly that only Sarah could hear him. "Where did that come from?" Sarah did not know how to answer. She was not sure where the song had come from either. It felt like it had been waiting inside her for years, fully formed and ready to emerge when the right moment arrived. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Sarah began to feel nervous again, but this time it was different. She was not afraid of judgment or criticism. She was afraid that this perfect moment might end, and she would have to return to being just a waitress again. Then something happened that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. The elderly woman at table 2 began to clap. Not the polite automatic applause that people give at the end of a performance, but slow, deliberate claps that sounded like prayer. One by one, other people joined in. The businessman with tears in his eyes began clapping. The kitchen staff started applauding. Even Marcus's business associates, who had been treating her music as background noise all evening, were clapping with genuine appreciation. But this was not ordinary applause. People were not just clapping their hands together. They were standing up one by one until the entire restaurant was on their feet. Sarah had never seen anything like it in her life. The woman at table 2 walked over to the piano, still clapping. When she reached Sarah, she stopped applauding and took both of Sarah's hands in her own. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I have not felt anything like that in 20 years. Sarah looked into the woman's eyes and saw something that confused her. The woman was looking at her with respect, even admiration. This was the same woman who usually snapped at the waitresses and complained about slow service. Now she was treating Sarah like she was someone important. "I do not understand," Sarah said quietly. "You just gave us a gift," the woman explained. "You shared something beautiful and true. That is what real artists do." The word artist hit Sarah like lightning. She had never thought of herself as an artist before. Artists were people who performed in concert halls, people who had training and degrees and recognition. Artists were not waitresses who played piano in restaurants. But looking around the room at all the faces filled with genuine emotion, Sarah began to wonder if maybe she had been wrong about what an artist really was. Marcus approached the piano, still looking stunned by what he had experienced. "Sarah, that was—" He paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "That was one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard." "It was just a song I made up," Sarah replied, still not quite believing what was happening. "No," Marcus said firmly. "It was much more than that. It was honest, it was real. It came from somewhere deep and true." The businessman from table 3 walked over to join the conversation. Sarah recognized him as someone who came to the restaurant often for business meetings. He had never spoken to her before except to order food. "Miss," he said to Sarah, "I have been coming here for 5 years, and I have never paid attention to anything except my business deals, but your music just made me remember why I wanted to start my company in the first place. It reminded me that there are things more important than money." Sarah stared at him in amazement. Her simple song had done that? Had really affected this successful businessman in such a profound way? More people began approaching the piano. A young couple who had been having what looked like a serious argument earlier were now holding hands and smiling. "Your music helped us remember why we fell in love," the woman told Sarah. An older man who often ate dinner alone told Sarah that her song had reminded him of his late wife and made him feel less lonely. A mother with 2 young children said that the music had made her think about her own dreams and whether it was too late to pursue them. One by one, people shared how Sarah's music had touched them personally. Each story was different, but they all had one thing in common. Sarah's honest, original song had connected with something deep inside each listener, something they had maybe forgotten was there. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention and praise. She was used to being invisible, someone who served food and cleaned tables while other people lived their important lives. Now these same people were treating her like she had given them something precious. "I still do not understand," Sarah said to Marcus. "It was just one song." Marcus smiled, and for the first time all evening, his smile was completely genuine and warm. "Sarah, most people go their entire lives without hearing music that real. What you just played was not just a song. It was a window into your soul, and through that window, we all saw something beautiful." He paused, looking around at all the people who were still standing near the piano, reluctant to return to their tables and end this magical moment. "You did not just play music tonight," Marcus continued. "You reminded everyone in this room what it feels like to be truly moved by art. You reminded us that there are still people in the world who create beauty just because it needs to exist." Sarah looked around at all the faces surrounding her. These people were not just being polite or trying to make her feel better. They had been genuinely affected by her music. Her simple personal song had somehow spoken to their hearts in a way that made them feel more connected to their own lives and to each other. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Not because she was serving food or following orders, but because she was sharing her gift with people who truly appreciated it. But the evening was not over yet. Marcus had one more surprise for her, something that would change her life forever. The crowd around the piano slowly began to return to their tables, but the atmosphere in the Golden Swan restaurant had changed completely. People were talking in soft, thoughtful voices instead of the loud business discussions that usually filled the room. Many customers were still looking over at Sarah with expressions of wonder and gratitude. Sarah remained sitting at the piano bench trying to process everything that had just happened. Her hands were still resting on the keys, as if she could not quite believe that those same hands had created something that moved so many people so deeply. Marcus waited until most of the other customers had returned to their seats before approaching Sarah again. When he spoke, his voice was different from the demanding, confident tone he had used earlier in the evening. Now he sounded humble, almost respectful. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Marcus said, pulling a chair close to the piano so he could sit down beside her. "I did not ask you to play tonight just for entertainment." Sarah looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, as if he was trying to decide how much to reveal. "I have been searching for something for a very long time, something that seems to be disappearing from the world." "Searching for what?" Sarah asked. "Authenticity," Marcus replied. "Real talent that comes from genuine passion, not from marketing or publicity or trying to become famous. I have attended hundreds of concerts and performances, but most of them felt empty to me. Technically perfect, but without soul." Sarah listened carefully, still not understanding where this conversation was leading. Marcus continued, "I started a foundation 3 years ago. It is called the Authentic Arts Foundation. We search for artists who create from their hearts, not from their desire for fame or money. We provide them with financial support, training opportunities, and the chance to share their work with the world." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you are exactly what we have been looking for," Marcus said simply. "What you did tonight, that original composition you played, it was extraordinary. Not just because it was beautiful, but because it was completely honest." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "I am just a waitress who takes music classes at night. I am not a real artist." "After what I heard tonight, I disagree completely," Marcus replied. "Real artists are not defined by their degrees or their job titles. They are defined by their ability to touch people's hearts with their creativity." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is my personal number. I would like you to call me tomorrow so we can discuss how the foundation can help you pursue your musical dreams." Sarah took the card with trembling hands. "What kind of help?" "Full tuition for music school, including private lessons with some of the best teachers in the country. A small salary so you do not have to work as a waitress unless you choose to. Access to professional recording studios and performance opportunities. Everything you need to develop your talent without worrying about money." Sarah stared at the business card, unable to believe what she was hearing. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Marcus smiled. Because talent like yours is rare and precious. It would be a tragedy to let it go to waste because of financial circumstances. Besides, what I heard tonight was not the performance of someone I just met. It was the performance of someone who has been developing their artistry for years, even without proper support. Sarah thought about her grandmother, who always said that music would find a way to survive even in the most difficult circumstances. Maybe this was what she meant. Maybe all those years of playing on cheap keyboards and studying at night had been preparing Sarah for this moment. I do not know what to say, Sarah whispered. Say yes, Marcus replied with a gentle smile. Sarah looked around the restaurant one more time. Mr. Peterson was watching from behind the counter, probably wondering why his waitress was having such a long conversation with his most important customer. The other waitresses were cleaning tables and serving desserts, doing the same work Sarah had been doing just 2 hours ago. But everything felt different now. Sarah felt different. The experience of sharing her music and seeing how it affected people had shown her something about herself that she had never fully understood. She was not just someone who happened to have musical training. She was someone who had something important to offer the world. What would I have to do? Sarah asked. First, quit your job here so you can focus completely on your music studies, Marcus explained. The foundation will provide enough financial support to cover all your living expenses. Then we will arrange for you to audition at several prestigious music schools. With your natural talent and the training you have already completed, I am confident you will be accepted. Sarah thought about her family, who depended on the money she earned at the restaurant. What about my family? I help support my mother and my brothers. The foundation can provide some additional assistance for family support as well, Marcus said. We understand that artists often come from families with financial challenges. That is part of what we are here to address. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy and disbelief, rather than frustration and sadness. This feels like a dream. It is not a dream, Marcus assured her. It is an opportunity that you have earned, through years of dedication to your art, even when no one was paying attention. One of Marcus's business associates approached the table, looking impatient. Marcus, we need to leave soon. We have that conference call with the Tokyo office in an hour. Marcus nodded but did not stand up immediately. Sarah, I need your answer now. Are you willing to accept the foundation's support and commit yourself fully to developing your musical career? Sarah looked down at the piano keys one more time. They had been silent for several minutes now, but she could still feel the music they had created together flowing through her mind. She thought about her grandmother's old piano, about all the dreams she had put aside, about all the nights she had fallen asleep listening to melodies in her head. Then she thought about the faces of all the people who had been moved by her music tonight. The elderly woman who thanked her for making her feel something she had not experienced in 20 years. The businessman who remembered why he had started his company. The young couple who remembered why they fell in love. Music was not just something Sarah loved. It was something the world needed, something that could bring beauty and connection and meaning to people's lives, and she had the ability to create that kind of music. Yes, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Yes, I accept your offer. I am ready to become the musician I was always meant to be. Marcus stood up and extended his hand to shake hers. Congratulations, Sarah. Your real life as an artist begins now. As Sarah shook his hand, she realized that everything had changed in the space of a single evening. A few hours ago, she had been a waitress who played piano as a hobby. Now she was an artist with the support and opportunity she needed to share her gift with the world. She looked around the Golden Swan restaurant one last time, but now she was not seeing it as an employee. She was seeing it as the place where her dreams had finally been recognized and given wings to fly. The piano sat silently in the corner, waiting for the next person who might need its voice to share something beautiful with the world. But tonight, it had done its most important work. It had helped Sarah discover who she really was and what she was capable of creating. As Marcus and his associates prepared to leave, Sarah remained at the piano for a few more minutes. She played one final song, this time a simple melody filled with gratitude and hope. It was her way of saying thank you to the instrument that had changed her life, and to all the people who had listened with open hearts. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. But tonight she was exactly where she belonged, sharing the gift of music with a world that desperately needed to hear it.